It's a pleasure to be here and share some great memories and stories with all of you from a trip we took in the summer of 2024. If you have any issues with the technology or not seeing the slides well, please let me know in the chat. If you have any questions or comments, please throw them in the chat as well. I can take them as we go through the program. And if you'd like to add any comments, I'll let you all come off of mute at the end and we can talk a little bit more. As Phil noted, I do like to take my family and friends on some unique adventures, especially when they involve rivers, rafting, paddling, and enjoying places that are pretty unique. So today I'm going to share with you some information about the John Day River. We had an outstanding trip in the summer of 2024. And, I've heard about a lot of famous rivers in the country, the Colorado, the Hudson, obviously all these great rivers out west, the salmon and the upper reaches of the Colorado. But the John Day River is really a unique gem in Oregon. We learned about it. We decided to go on this incredible adventure there. And this is obviously a map of Oregon looking at the watersheds and the topography. Many areas of Oregon you might be very familiar with, Portland, of course. Well, here's the John Day watershed. It's kind of just far enough east that it doesn't get a lot of attention. And that's what we love about it. That's why we planned our trip there. You can see the other geographic provinces in Oregon, the Cascade Mountains, and then just to the west of the John Day River is the Deschutes River. Very popular, very well known. Paralleling that river with the same type of topography is the John Day River watershed. It's comparable in size to the Delaware River. It's a little bit smaller, but it's about 10,000 square miles. So think about that size, that watershed scale, and the volume of water, the width of the river. Those are all somewhat comparable in scale. These are the different provinces, geologically speaking, in Oregon. The three stars you see are the three units of the John Day Fossil Bed National Monument. We'll talk more about that too quickly. Thanks for bearing with me through the geographic slides. And here's that watershed map, looking at all the rivers that flow into the Columbia River Basin or flow directly into the Pacific Ocean. And really, honestly, most of these rivers have great recreational value, whether it's the Willamette, Deschutes, the Grand Ronde, the John Day, of course, the Klamath. These are famous rivers for rafting, including the Rogue, the Umpqua. So, very popular out in Oregon and Washington to enjoy multi-day rafting trips or even single-day rafting trips with family and friends. The John Day is truly unique, though. It's unique both with its history and its Native American heritage. Many tribes overlap in this area. The tribes of the Great Basin that kind of focus more in the desert of Arizona and Utah and western Colorado, they continue up into Oregon. And then the tribes that are further north, like the Yakima, kind of start overlapping further south. So this area of Oregon in central and northern Oregon is really a hotbed for Native American activity over 16,000 years. And the Northern Paiute is really the most iconic, classic Native American tribe that historically has lived and still continues today to call this area home. There's not nearly as many left as there were way back when. And in the John Day River watershed is Malheur Cave. And this particular cave is more than 2,000 feet deep and long. It's wide. This cave is the story of the Paiute Indians is that all life on Earth began from the Malheur Cave. It emerged from the cave as animals. Animals ultimately then became humans. So the cave is just upstream from where we put on for our rafting trip and has great meaning and significance to the Paiute Indians. Then moving forward, white people began to settle the area after the Lewis and Clark expedition in the early 1800s. That quickly transitioned into the exploration of the area for furs and for trapping. John Day, who's pictured here, obviously the river and the watershed was named after him. That's a really outstanding hat, right? I've never seen anything like it. Really wild. Well, the Pacific Fur Company sent people all over the country to trap and to collect furs. John Day ultimately was found by some of his colleagues. He was found naked in the river itself, like along the banks of it, one day after having a tussle with the Native Americans. So they ultimately named the river after the place that John Day had that, unfortunate experience. Though I can imagine many of these people were single and traveling by themselves, may not have been the most professional and upstanding representatives of the Pacific Fur Company. So suspect John Day may not have been treating the Native Americans with the utmost respect that they deserved, and ultimately was found by his colleagues, as I noted. So the river was named for John Day, but soon thereafter, the Oregon Trail was established across the region. It crossed the John Day River at McDonald's Ferry, and this is actually the watershed looking west of the Cascade Mountains. Maybe that's Mount Hood or one of the other big peaks with snow up in the Cascades. And the Oregon Trail obviously popularized the region. This is the Oregon Trail National Historic designated area. And we're kind of looking at the area where it says John Day River Crossing. That's McDonald's Ferry. That's approximately where we ended our river trip. And I promise I'm going to get into the river trip soon. But this history really is instrumental to the region and to our experience of it. This is how people would cross the John Day River, and many of you know that you could cross by ferry or you could ford the river, as the famous game Oregon Trail made popular. The Oregon Trail map you can see on the right side from the video game shows the Blue Mountains, which are the headwaters of the John Day River watershed. And it's actually really important to our story and our trip here. And the Dalles is just west of where the John Day River enters the Columbia. And the John Day River is right at the end of the Oregon Trail crossing of the Blue Mountains, which was the most rugged and most difficult after people had been journeying for many, many weeks and months. And that's what the river looks like today. It's an outstanding, unique character. I've rafted all around the country. I've been canoeing, kayaking, camping, and rafting throughout the United States and Alaska and Hawaii. And this is not the Oregon high desert. The high desert of Oregon really is the southern and western higher elevation portions of the state. This area is unique and different. I mentioned John Day Fossil Beds National Monument. In the 1960s, the president declared a national monument to celebrate the unique fossils that exist in this area. So in addition to the Native American culture, over 40 and 50 million years, fossils were formed by volcanic activity in the area, overlapped with all sorts of different plants and animals that call this area home for many, many years. What you see here is the unique shape of the rock is basalt. It's a volcanic based rock that we'll talk a little bit more about as the program goes on. So this is some of the seismic and volcanic activity that occurred in the area, and you can orient yourself with Washington above you and Oregon and the Columbia River Basin forming the border between the two of them. These are the fossil beds formed by so many millions of years of that volcanic activity. Clarno, Painted Hills, and Sheep Rock, again, being instrumental to the Fossil Bed National Monument. Those are the three individual units where the US government owns land. Each one of those colors shows an overlapping fossil bed. So it's not that there's fossils, it's that there's like 10 or 15 overlapping fossil beds. So when you look at the cliff on the right here, you'll see throughout all of those layers and strata, you'll see all sorts of fossils, plants, animals of all kinds, dinosaurs, of course. Just an incredible history. And due to the uplifting of the area from volcanic activity and then ultimately the weathering of the rock, it has led to an incredibly beautiful landscape. This is the Painted Hills. Obviously, you can tell why it's called that. Incredible colors. And even without the sunset, those hills really do look like that with that picturesque red and just beautiful landscape. So because of those characteristics, the rural nature of it, it's far enough from Portland that it doesn't see, general public kind of day traffic. The area is nationally designated under the Federal Wild and Scenic Rivers Program. 220 miles of the river corridor is protected in a free-flowing nature. It's surrounded by wilderness areas. They're not formally designated just due to kind of local political interests, but well established for its wilderness characteristics and quite a lot of public land. And then the national forests make up the headwaters. And that McDonald's Ferry site where the Oregon Trail crosses the John Day River was protected thanks to a program that we care a lot about at the Appalachian Mountain Club, the Federal Land and Water Conservation Fund, that helped make 4,000 acres of the McDonald's Ferry crossing available for public use in perpetuity. So let's get started. We had been planning this trip for a long time. Many of the rivers out west that you can do multi-day whitewater rafting on require a permit. Many of those permits have a lottery system due to high demand. The John Day doesn't have the highest demand, but we did get the permit ultimately. This is the revised permit that we got. We were planning on floating about 120 miles over a 7-day, 6-night period. We shortened that trip to about 70 miles, and you can see our launch date, June 27th, and our takeoff date of July 3rd. That was based on like school schedules and travel schedules, but it was also based on the watershed. So out west in the Colorado and Rockies, this is snow telemetry data. So snowpack is recorded on remote observation sites and then transmitted back to the U.S. Geological Survey. And you can access this at any point. It tells you snowpack as it currently exists, kind of historic and average snowpack, good years and bad years. So as you notice, the snowpack starts to drop off when the spring and summer season is upon us. So the snow melts, water goes in the river, and it flows downstream. The John Day does not have a single dam in the entire watershed. So there's no regulation of the water. If you want to go rafting on the John Day River, you have to catch it when that snow melt is starting to come down, when that water is melting and flowing into the river. So that translates into what you see here is a rafting window in the April to June timeline. So a late June launch was risky. This is the hydrograph for the water in the river when we were getting ready to launch. It was declining and getting lower and lower. So we could have launched a few days earlier, but we were locked in by that permit and our travel schedule. We organized all the logistics. Here's one of our complicated spreadsheets: food, equipment, expenses, participants, everything you can imagine. My wife and I love a complicated Google spreadsheet. And what's even more complicated is rafting with kids. Some of the kids like the mac and cheese in the box, some of it like the mac and cheese that you add the powdered mix to versus the liquid cheese mix. So complicated logistics getting everybody happy and ready for the trip. This is our group, though. We got 4 families get together with 4 kids, and Jackie and Travis and their kids, Carter and Ethan on the left, myself, my wife, Lee, and our son Brady kind of in the middle. Case in front, the younger 9-year-old with the blue hat. Case's mother, Christine, on the far right with Ken, her partner. Behind Case is Bridget, who came as a friend, and then our friends Joe and Jewel with the big hats as well. This is kind of our group shot here. Take a look. We started out by flying into Portland, and we love complicated logistics, so I'll share some of those logistics with you. We rented an Airbnb for 2 nights. After arriving in Portland, the rental SUV we rented from the airport, we had to go out and purchase all the food and all the supplies we needed for the trip. So anything we couldn't fly with, we had to buy out there. We did have one access to a vehicle. Joe and Jewel drove from Pennsylvania out and met us at the river. They didn't join us in Portland. So I don't have any photos of it, but we spent the next day and a half organizing all the food, packing everything up, getting all the toys and all the equipment that we needed for the trip. Then we packed up and we headed to the put-in. This is the launch location for our whitewater rafting trip, Clarno. You can tell it's a pretty popular location. Downstream of here is 70 miles of wild and scenic river with no roads, no access whatsoever, no phones, no houses, like true wilderness setting. But upstream of here is also wild and scenic river that's a little bit more popular. You can do 1, 2, or 3-day trips. Downstream of this location, you're really committed to a 5, 6, or 7-day trip. So we were covering 70 miles on the trip over 7 days. But on the day you're launching and the day you're taking out, you're not really covering that many miles. You've got a lot to deal with on those days. So we were trying to average 12 to 15 miles a day and to have some extra padding in there if we needed to do that. We spent the night, let me talk about the kiosk here. They're very serious about the permit system. You have to fill out your permit and put it in the box. And during this trip, it was getting later in the season, so there was a fire ban in place. We were not able to have any fires. You'll see why too. Like it was dry, like really dry out there. And the other thing is the pack in, pack out system. So talk a little bit more about it. But as with any wilderness trip, everything that comes in with you has to go out with you, including human waste. I think the only human waste that didn't come out with us was urine. We were allowed to leave that behind. But honestly, everything else did come out. We spent the night camping at the put-in. They had some campsites along the river designed for groups like ours to use. And this site was cool. It looked like they were trying to protect these hardwood trees from beavers or some type of other species that was damaging them. Very few like mature hardwood trees along the corridor. And just had a lot of fun getting ready to go. Here's Carter. I'm sorry. Here's Ethan. I think Ethan was 4 years old on the trip, maybe 3.5, 4. But well, you'll see a lot of toys for the kids, but also just a lot of fun rafting. We were successful in getting an outfitter to rent us 4 rafts. The rafts came with metal oar frames. You can see those here. And each raft came with 1 cooler. So this was going to be our vessel to get us down our 70-mile journey. My son is very familiar with using rafts, so he's using a hand pump to top it off, make sure it's ready to go for the next day. The outfitters were few and far between. There was literally only one, and it was like a gas station that primarily serviced motorcycle riders through the area. So they had a small fleet of rafts, real mom and pop shop. Pros and cons, but ultimately they got the rafts there when we needed them, and they helped pick them up at the takeout. So glad we could get that service for our trip because we needed it. And that first night we were blessed with just a spectacular sunset, which proved to be something that we could enjoy every night of the 6-night trip. And we woke up in the morning to an otter, and I know it's a terrible photo of it, but you can imagine just a great start. Beautiful river, clear water, and the water level is a little bit low. And you'll see that throughout the trip. We launched low. We did the best we could on the logistics. The snow melt, actually, if you remember from last summer, we had that heat wave in like late June, early July. That heat wave hit the Blue Mountains of Oregon, a week before it hit us or whatever, really caused that snow melt to accelerate. And the river dropped a little bit lower than we were hoping. We launched at about 700 cubic feet per second, which is low. The Delaware River, for example, runs on average at about 2,000 cubic feet per second on a dry summer day. So you'll see that, but honestly, didn't matter. We had a great time out there. One thing about the low water is that the water is slower, so you have to paddle a little bit more, but the fishing was much, much, much better. My wife on a stand-up paddleboard, I'm glad we brought those out. It was awesome. My son on the left and my wife again. Just a view of the group here. There's Travis and Jackie, their son Carter and Ethan. And just a reminder that, kids like people have feelings too, and sometimes they get a little grumpy. But generally speaking, we had a really upbeat and positive group throughout the trip. And there's Joe on the oar rigs. We call them the sticks. So we'll say Joe's on the sticks that day. And the first day of the trip after we launched, we reached our largest rapid of the day. This is Clarno Rapid. I'm sorry, of the trip. Clarno Rapid was a hard class 3, maybe a class 4 rapid, depending on the water level. You can tell how low it was. We were facing more rocks than we were facing big waves and holes. But navigating those rocks was kind of even harder than it would be with more water. So what we asked the group to do is we were scouting the river, and here's the bottom of that rapid. So imagine coming through that rocky kind of minefield, and then at the bottom you've got what I would call like a picket fence that you kind of can't fit a raft through easily. So we had to get through this rapid. The goal was kind of to keep moving pretty quickly that day. So what we did is we had the kids and some of the other group members walk the rapid, portage it, and we ran it, try to keep some weight out of the rafts. Also, we definitely didn't want any kids to fall in this particular rapid. Just how rocky it is, like you'd get beat up a little bit. So nice portage trail. Here's some photos of that Clarno Rapid. It was fun and it was tricky. When it was low, you don't have as much water to like work with to move the raft out of the way of the rocks you're gonna hit. But we had a good run. Everybody made it through unscathed. And here we are below Clarno Rapid. We had a bunch of these kayaks, which we flew out there in checked bags. They're great little boats. The kids love them, the adults love them. And there's a bottom view of that picket fence. So when I said it, like the rafts didn't really fit through them, I remember my raft. I just drove it full speed at the slot between two rocks that looked the biggest, and I still got stuck. And then I had to like jump to the front of the raft and kind of like pull it off the rocks. Wasn't too bad, but we made it through all right. And just downstream of Clarno, this was a pretty consistent view of the river. Class 1 rapids, something like you'd see on the Delaware River. And we brought inner tubes with us. We picked up at the shop, and the kids. This is camp at night one. The kids just had a great time walking up the rapids, going through them, enjoying the inner tubes. You'll also notice the topography here. The gorge is not that deep yet. At its deepest point, the John Day River Gorge is 3,000 feet deep, so really quite a spectacular canyon. We're working our way down into the deeper parts of the canyon now, and we're going to see some more of the basalt, different types of geology as we head downstream. So here's our typical camp setup. Again, we flew all this stuff out. The mats themselves are called sand mats. It's multi-layered mesh, and when you get sand on top of it, the sand works its way through the mesh. So it's really nice because you can keep your feet from getting sandy at any given point. And those mesh nets also pick up any food, micro trash, plastic that you might drop. Hopefully you're not dropping that stuff in camp, but it's just another great chance to make sure you're practicing leave no trace. And we brought the tables, full camp set up for the kitchen. The red buckets on the left are awesome. This is a great like rafting innovation. One bucket has clean water in it with a little bleach. The other bucket has dirty water in it, and there's a foot pump. You press the foot pump, and it allows you to wash your hands. Really a great way to help make sure you've got good sanitation on the trip. And the ecology was outstanding. I mean, these campsites were gorgeous. The sagebrush you can see on the right, and then the spectacular flowers and lilies on the left. Not a ton of vegetation because certainly it's pretty arid out there, but really unique and outstanding. Kind of a classic dinner here. We'd make food for everybody. The groups, though, had different dietary kind of needs and interests, and we had kids and some folks that had allergies and whatnot. So we would purchase a lot of food, and then each group could really cook it for themselves. So we kind of gave variations on it. There'd always be, a pasta, a meat, there'd be vegetables, there'd be quinoa, rice, appetizers, cheese, crackers. And over like a 7-day trip, the quality and the freshness, it's really at its best the first day, and then you save some of your like canned foods and salsa and chilies and Mexican food for like the end of the trip because a lot of that stuff will last longer, whether it's in the cooler or not. Oh, Dan asked if the folks who drove out carried our camping gear home or did the outfitters shuttle it back? So a great question. Those of us that flew out, so only 2 people drove out. You're looking at Jewel right now and her husband, Joe. They drove out with a standard SUV, and we put the camp tables on it. We put the camp stoves in the car. We put water jugs and a few other big things in their SUV. Everything else you see, we flew out there. So even that camp table right there, that's mine. We checked that in our checked bags. So we had checked quite a few bags for this trip. The outfitters only brought the rafts, dropped them off at Put In, and picked up those rafts at the takeout location. The camps were outstanding, like I said. Beautiful views, sagebrush everywhere. You'll see the dry bags that kept all of our stuff dry. Those were also the bags that we would use for our checked luggage on the airplane. And obviously, kids love camping. Take them camping, throw them in a tent. They'll have a great time. Ethan's my favorite. I've been on so many trips with him. He just has such a great attitude, so much spirit, and just always makes you laugh. It's that 3-year-old, 4-year-old range. I just love him that age. So we woke up the next morning, just spectacular views again. And I really had to cut out a lot of photos that we had from the spectacular fishing. I mentioned the water was low and I mentioned the fishing was good. I can't help but show you some of these photos. That's me on the right in the blue. There's Case in the red. But just having kids, a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, another 6-year-old, and a 4-year-old catching fish all day long. I mean, every single cast, fish left and right. These are smallmouth bass primarily. There were some other species in there, primarily smallmouth. But really, I think we created some new um, fishing advocates in the future here on this trip. And there's Joe and Jewel. Those are the two who had driven their SUV out there. But that shows you what a typical raft looks like. It's pretty loaded down. We've got the cooler full of food, obviously, and beverages, anything in there. And then we got the dry bags, the big barrel in the back, that's dry as well. You need some space to sit. But you'll also notice this raft is tied down. So you've got those NRS, those blue straps all across it. Even though this river was pretty mild, we have a rule. It's called rig to flip. So it means any day, any moment, you could flip your raft over. You should have everything tied down, ready for that circumstance. Because the last thing you want to do is flip a raft over, lose all your food, lose your personal items. So that's how we approach it. And this is Christine. Christine's awesome, ton of fun and energy out there. Christine is the mother to Case, the one who caught the fish in the last slide. Just a great time, beautiful view all around. And here's my son. These are 3 different fish he caught. I mean, seriously, like out of control. We had counted over 200 fish that my son caught on this trip, and across the entire group, we think we caught more than 1,000. Out of control. I'm telling you, it was great. Snacks and lunch on the river. So we would make breakfast in the morning, keep it pretty simple, but a pretty big breakfast bar. So we'd have oatmeal, we'd have cold cereal, we'd have eggs available if anyone wanted to cook anything like that, yogurt with fruit and granola. And then on the river, we'd pack up lunch. So we'd bring lunch with us, and you could eat lunch whenever you wanted. So I've been on a lot of trips where you'd stop at a designated time at a designated place, you'd get all the food out, you'd make wraps and sandwiches, and you know what, the whole ordeal would take like 2 hours. And we just decided we'd eat lunch while we were floating. So when you make breakfast, you'd make your lunch, you pack it to go, throw it in your dry bag, and then everybody on the trip could kind of like have a slightly different pace. If you wanted to go faster, you wanted to fish, you wanted to go on a little hike. So we all stayed together and we could see each other at all times. But it was nice to have that flexibility. And I've been on enough of these trips to kind of think through each family unit having the ability to kind of customize things based on how their day is going. Now you're starting to see the geology changing. We're seeing a lot of that hard rock, volcanic rock starting to pop up, less of the sandstone, a little bit less of the weathered rock. And this is what I mentioned about lunch. The kids get hungry, you throw a wrap at them in the middle of the day. Maybe it's 10 o'clock, maybe it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Doesn't matter, let them eat. You'll notice these pictures, the water's again a little bit low, but totally navigable. We could get through. Obviously, you can see kind of the rock bar in the middle of the river too. And whether you're on the stand-up paddleboard or the kayak or the raft, we just switch it up. Everybody get to paddle different things, tie the inner tube to the back of the raft and float on down. The temperatures were hot each day, 90, 95, maybe as hot as 100. In full sun, it felt hot, but it didn't feel excruciating. That kind of hot where people talk about like Arizona, like it's a dry heat. Well, I hate to say it, but that's kind of what it felt like. It was definitely dry. And the kids loved the kayaks. This is Carter. And what's fun, getting the kids in kayaks, they all had one. They all have this fear of missing out. So like one kid would get in a kayak and then all of them would have to get in the kayaks, which was great because like I wanted them to kind of peer pressure each other to going out there and challenging themselves on the rapids. And this was another good rapid of the trip. This was Basalt Rapid. We're starting to get into that basalt geology a little bit more. Solid class 2 rapid. The kids did a great job. I didn't get a ton of pictures. I was setting safety for everybody, making sure nobody got hurt. This was my photo. I think I was on the side of the river getting ready for the kids to come through. And we'd stop above these rapids, let the kids take a look at them, scout them out, find where they're going to go, make sure they could help each other out. And then the adults would kind of run down the river with them and keep an eye on them. But generally no major incidents with the kids paddling the kayaks. You can see them here. Pretty standard view floating down the John Day. So we're starting to see more of that basalt, whether it's like in the river or on the cliffs. And the basalt boulders in the river also formed really unique rapids and just really gorgeous water. So these are the basalt columns we'll see a little bit more about. And essentially it's volcanic activity, the lava rose, and I think through rapid cooling, it caused it to form that type of crystalline structure. And here's another great campsite. I just want to show you like what we would have to do at camp. So you don't want to lose your rafts. You never know if the water level is going to come up kind of or go down, and you certainly don't want one of your rafts to float away. So we would tie them all together. Actually, where they're tied together there, we've got a big stake in the sand holding them in place. And then backing up that stake, we have another rope tied all the way up to shore up onto a tree. And just like I said, rig to flip, strap everything down on your raft before you launch in the morning. Strap everything down at camp. You never know if it's going to be a heavy wind that comes out of nowhere, picks one of those kayaks up, and sends it downstream, or if the rain's going to come and the water level is going to come up. It doesn't even have to rain here in camp. It could rain way upstream, could bring the river up, and that could cause your raft to come off the beach and float downstream. So tie everything down all the time is the best way to go. And this was a great fish we caught at this camp. This camp had a great fishing hole, very deep, some of the biggest fish of the trip. This one's like 18 or 20 inches. I mean, and Carter caught it all by himself. Just his proud father had to get his picture with it. It was awesome. This is that upstream view of camp. You'll also see that gorge is starting to get deeper and deeper as we're heading further and further downstream. Well, I paddled over to the basalt cliffs and I got this outstanding picture. Those are swallow nests. Do you see them all in the cliffs? Every little nook and cranny's got a swallow nest. So they'd all kind of come out and swarm around. It was outstanding. Really kind of loud and rambunctious, but just awesome watching them kind of come in and out and use that cliff as its habitat. Now, I didn't get a ton of pictures of fossils, and I kind of apologize. Actually, on this trip, I took fewer photos than I have on other adventures. But here's one of them. I mean, this rock was just sitting in camp. That's a fern leaf. And I have a whole book about the fossils. So I brought the book with me, and just great educational opportunities for the kids, talking about the history, how fossils were formed, talking about what the age range was for the different species, and then how that ties back to the geology. And I had a whole library of books here. If anybody's ever interested in learning more, you can borrow any of my books. One's about the Native American history of the area. This one I read to the kids every single night. One chapter about different aspects of the Native American Northern Paiute Indians. They ate it up. They loved it. A book about the fossils, and then a book, I call it The White People's History of the John Day. It's more about that 1805 to modern day history. And this camp was great. And on a hot day, you're really looking for a camp with shade. And the trees are all juniper trees. If you look carefully, you can see those juniper berries all around it. And there's my wife and me reading books out of the library, I called it, and the group just relaxing in camp, fishing, telling stories, just had a really awesome time. And that's a view of those basalt cliffs, and those big lunker fish are hanging out right underneath the cliffs there. Now, the water jug, I wanted to point out, the John Day River, though it has no dams whatsoever, upstream it does have some agriculture, and the agriculture is known to allow runoff of pesticides and herbicides, also cattle and other livestock that are allowed to walk in the rivers and the streams. So though the water quality is classified as drinkable, it does have a certain percentage of pesticides and herbicides. And the government doesn't closely regulate the quantity of herbicides and pesticides in waters like this, largely because they consider those safe, but they're not really safe. They're carcinogenic. So we really did our best not to drink any water out of the river, though I think you probably could. You can imagine families and kids, you just want to play it safe because there's no real way to know what the thresholds of how much Roundup you should be drinking really is. So we went no Roundup in our appetite. And we brought all of our water. So we brought those water jugs. I think we had 7 or 8 of them. It was more than enough for us to make it through the 8-day trip. And, we had some adult beverages too, so enough to round it out. Gorgeous view, again, that juniper tree, just providing that sense of home at that campsite. And games for the kids, love card games. My son loves card games, so do the others. Lots of different games we brought, games for camp. We brought the beanbag games and all sorts of other good things for them to do. You can't beat those views. Dan, thanks for the question about the fish. We did eat some fish, not a ton. The kids had mixed emotions about eating the fish. And anyway, we had that, maybe you remember growing up. I certainly do the first time we caught a fish and we like fried it up and ate it. So we definitely provided that memory. We were not like living on the fish, though. We did invent a game, though, and I think it's my claim to fame, actually. The game, because we caught 1,000 of these fish, 1,000. You're like sick of them. Like my hands smelled like fish all trip because my son would throw the fish at me and be like, Dad, take it off the hook. Um, and the bass actually are introduced sport fish. This watershed traditionally housed salmon and other native species and still has them, but the bass are out competing the native salmon and other native species. So I invent that. So the Oregon Fish and Game Department encourages you to not catch and release, to actually eradicate the smallmouth and eat them if you want them, or literally leave them on shore and let them die. So I didn't really want to do that, but my game fish goes like this. You might know the game horse. So you take a fish, I would unhook it from my son's reel, I would throw it at a nearby raft. And if one of the people in the raft caught the fish, I would give them a letter. And the first person to spell the word fish won the game. It's actually really hard to catch a smallmouth bass flying in the air 50 feet from you. So a lot of times the bass would land in the boat, they flop around a little bit, you pick it up, put it back in the water. We had a lot of fun out there, you can tell. So this is what life looked like when we got to camp. I think we're getting ready to launch that morning. A lot of equipment, kids, life jackets, inner tubes. But we got better and better at it throughout the trip, getting launched, kind of unpacking when we got to camp. The Boater's Guide, this book, has detailed maps in it. You can purchase it from the Bureau of Land Management. So it tells you, sorry about it tells you what mile you're at. It tells you where the campsites are. It gives you a description of the campsites. There were other people out there, and we would talk to the other paddlers and users about what campsites they were planning to visit. And we had a relatively large group. So there are large, medium, and small campsites identified on the map. There was like, for example, a couple there from Colorado in a tandem canoe. It was just the two of them. So they were like very polite and very nice, and they would stop at the smaller campsites and we would communicate, and they would always let us know that the bigger campsites, we could have them and where they were and what they looked like. So, you stay in touch with the other users out there just to make sure everybody's having a great experience. More fish. And the water level was lower, like I mentioned, but like it led to the water being super gorgeous. The reflections were outstanding. You can tell the vegetation was limited, but you could also tell as we were going downstream where there were seeps and springs, which were few and far between. Sometimes there would be these little ridges with like kind of an oasis of greenery. Very few and far between, though. This particular view, the benches, the sides of the river, the shorelines, were more vegetated than we saw elsewhere throughout the trip. And those basalt columns really became more and more dramatic as we went further downstream. We're on day 3 or 4 of the trip now out of 7. And they started to create these basalt column folds. And I can't really describe how that happens, but I know the basalt columns are the volcanic activity, the lava cooling rapidly, like we saw in that old photograph with the dinosaurs. And they would uplift then over time, and then the non-volcanic rock around it would get eroded. So ultimately, that would leave these columns sticking up. And then I'm sure it was some type of folding event that would lead to those folds. And this is a sign from way, way upstream in the headwaters that describes the Picture Gorge basalt cliffs. And really unique, but it does describe how the lava cooled and the layers became jumbled and columnar in nature. So we really enjoyed the basalt columns for the second half of the trip. Really outstanding geology. Let me go back to that one, though. If you look at the colors on the rock, you can again tell how high that water level gets. So peak snow melts when the river is as high as it gets every spring is going to cover that darker black area, kind of right up to that red line. And then that's how much lower the river was for our trip. And there's Ethan, my man, with a water gun. We all got blasted all trip. Every kid had a water gun. Just another outstanding campsite under a beautiful juniper tree. This photo showcases that hand washing station really well. And we always had hand sanitizer and baby wipes and everything you could imagine to try to keep clean. And that's our kind of standard camping setup. We also had those mesh bags, primarily for kid toys and fishing equipment, water bottles, all sorts of stuff would get thrown in there that didn't need to stay dry. I loved this campsite. I think this was night 4. And we'd always go on side hikes. One of us, 2 of us, 3 of us, 4 of us, 5 of us, just to take a look around. Well, do you see those grasses? I mean, those grasses are bone dry. That's why that fire prohibition was in place. There hadn't been rain in many, many weeks, and you could just feel it. Just looking at those grasses, just the slightest spark, and I think that whole thing could have gone up in flames. And those side hikes would take us to these unmarked hills that didn't have names, just providing even better views of the river and the watershed, the clouds and the sun. We didn't really have any rain on the trip at all, which was nice and lovely, but it was dry. And again, just those sweeping, unique, outstanding views. Under the juniper trees here in camp, one reason you really wanted trees in camp is not just because it cooled down the temperature when you got to camp, but when you wake up in the morning. You ever wake up in the desert in full sun at 6 o'clock in the morning and it's already 100 degrees in your tent? It's not ideal. Camp chairs for everybody. This was the next campsite. I think I'm leaping ahead a day already. It's a great horned owl, I think. Well, there was like a family of them. And if I don't know if any of you have seen a great horned owl up close or like gone into a barn where a great horned owl lives. Well, it was like a mom and a dad and a bunch of little gray horned owls. And they were, I think, not thrilled we were there. They were so rambunctious. I mean, loud. Like it was wild. And even like when the kids are trying to fall asleep at like 9 o'clock and they're like in their tent and they're exhausted and the owls are just like screeching the whole time and the kids are screaming, make those owls quiet down. You're like, what do you want me to do? I can't make the owls quiet down. But ultimately, they survived. The kids slept it through. We woke up to another outstanding view. Now you can see how much deeper the canyon is at this location. Really, really much deeper. And in the morning, just really placid and gorgeous, relaxing views of the river. This one had great sagebrush. Oh, we stopped at lunch this day halfway down the river. There was a lot of Native American use of the river corridor over more than 15,000 years. Just like the Oregon Trail crossed the region, the corridor was a trail location where many different tribes would travel. It also overlapped the Northern Paiutes with many other Native American tribes. They were all very cordial, amazingly, through those 15,000 years of Native American legacy here. But here we are ultimately at one of the most famous petroglyph sites on the river. These were prolific throughout the watershed. We came across a number of them. This one was the one I got the best photographs of. And I think, if I understand correctly, it is a petroglyph because it is a carving. It's etched into the rock, but it is also a pictograph or a painting. So they had carved extensively along the rock shelf here. And just to kind of bring it back, the carving you're looking at that took up an enormous space, much bigger than this photograph, is the story of the Malheur Cave. It's the origin story of animals that emerged from the cave, ultimately becoming people. And that story was so, ingrained in their culture that it almost provided a great theme for the trip. And luckily, I had my Legends of the Northern Paiute book with me for the whole trip and brought it with me on the petroglyph hike. And it did actually help me interpret some of those symbols because you can imagine the kids, their first question was, what does that mean? Which I wouldn't have known offhand. And it was a huge expanse of these petroglyphs. They had used the tributary, that dry creek bed you see there, as a trail to come down into the John Day River corridor for thousands and thousands of years. Our wonderful friend Bridget enjoying her red kayak and quite a bit of wildlife. Interestingly, and sorry about the poor quality of the photographs, on the right is a quail. So I saw more game birds than I've ever seen in the wild. We saw quail, like hundreds of quail every day, pheasants everywhere, chukars all over the place. Like, it was cool. It was kind of wild, actually. And we did see bighorn sheep and other big game as well. And just the views again, you know, the geology, the basalt. Another amazing campsite. We really lucked out with the quality of the campsites. These beaches, like, not every river trip I've been on has beaches of this quality. Outstanding everywhere. And the panoramic views, you know, they speak for themselves. Juniper trees. I think they're all juniper trees. And they must be pretty old, because like when I think about a juniper tree, I think like a much smaller size. There's my son taking off in his kayak. Wonderful family photos. You can see how much deeper the gorge is down here too. And we put the kids on the sticks too. You got to make them earn their dinner. They all did great though, and did not tire out as quickly as you would think. Those of you who have never rode a big oar rig before, there's probably 1,000 to 1,500 pounds on that raft, including the raft itself. So when it's the flat water like this, you really got to get the motion right. You got to find out how much you can pull that water without killing yourself. And then you've got to keep a certain cadence up. So like when you're canoeing, you know, if your strokes are not consistent, it's hard to keep the boat consistently moving. So we had to really get those kids learning how to kind of get that cadence down. But they did great. And here's my son, Brady, killing it. He was 6 years old for the trip. Actually, he just turned 7, actually. His birthday was right before the trip. And one of the best, we didn't see it coming, but the kids, even though they're older, Carter's 7 in this photo, they'd all take a nap, which is great, because once the kids get older and they don't take naps anymore, all the parents are like, man, I wish my kid would still take a nap in the afternoon. So they would take naps, kayak, and just float along. We're rounding out the photos. I promise we're getting to the end here. This was super cool. This was called Hoot Owl Rock. It's a rock. It's not an owl. Oh, sorry. How crazy is that? And like as you paddle around on the raft, you're looking up at it from every angle, and you're like, it looks like a giant owl. Like, it looked like somebody carved it, but it's totally natural. We got Bridget on the sticks, tons of bighorn sheep as we headed further down. There's Jewel with just a monster. Sorry about the fishing pictures. Oh my gosh, this was a great one. My wife and son both caught 2 fish at the same time and then overlapped their lines and pulled them both in at the same time. You can tell we're getting a little punchy. I think this is day 6 going on day 7. The kids are getting a little feral and in need of a shower. This campsite was a little bit different here. We were kind of tucked on this bench up along this cliff, a little more wooded, a little more dense. More card games though, and when I mentioned the pack out, this is our Groover setup. Groover's a toilet. They've upgraded a little bit since I started going on multi-day rafting trips. These are your standard kind of buckets from Lowe's or Harbor Freight, and all we have is a rubber ring on top of it that you can sit on, but the bag inside of it is a giant wag bag. So a wag bag is a backpacking product where if you need to go number 2 in the backcountry, you can go in the bag. The bag will actually dissolve the human waste and make it safe enough that you can throw it away in a regular garbage can. It also keeps like all the odor at 0. There's almost no odor whatsoever. So that's a big improvement. When I 15 years ago went on my first rafting trip on the Grand Canyon, and it was just a bucket, no bag, and you'd open the bucket, use it, and then close it back up. Things have gotten better. So we had a couple of these buckets because if you know kids have a less predictable digestive cycle than most adults. But I'm glad we did have some extras. It kind of made things a little more comfortable for everybody instead of having to like wait in line. And if you ever had to have a kid wait in line to go to the bathroom, it's not always a great scenario. Lots of sheep, outstanding fishing, and kayaking. The kids got more and more into it as the trip went on. My son's always been a kayaker, but Case and Carter started kayaking 15 miles each day. They'd get in their kayak in the morning and do the whole trip. And you're reaching the end. They asked me, because I was always the keeper of the guidebook, hey, Mark, when are we getting to the end? I'd always give them the classic story, like right around the bend. Well, then they didn't like that one anymore. So I started telling them that you'll know you're at the end when you can see the end. They didn't like that answer either. The kids, right? Well, this is how you know when you're at the end of the trip. You see the first bridge you've seen in 70 miles. And that bridge is the Cottonwood State Park Bridge, the Cottonwood State Park boat launch. Here's another group that was taken off the river that day. Here's Joe and Jules' Jeep. They had been on a multi-month road trip, so we didn't have a ton of space that we could use in their vehicle, but they did transport some of our equipment. So there we are at takeout, and we're wrapping up. We have lunch. We're waiting for the outfitter to come pick up their rafts, getting all of our gear sorted. And then as soon as we leave, first stop, we go stop at a restaurant, get an adult beverage, get the kids some burgers. And then on the way out, we stopped at the Columbia Gorge Discovery Center, just like an environmental exhibit and museum. Really interactive, hands-on. The kids loved it, learned a ton. We had a great time. Just nice being in air conditioning for a minute. And we made our way down to Hood River, the gorgeous town of Hood River on the Columbia, where we took off the river on July 3rd. So this is now July 3rd in the afternoon. After we got lunch, we stopped at the Columbia Gorge Discovery Center. We went downtown, checked into our hotel. Then we went to the local park to get ready for July 4th. July 4th. Oh, this was the next day, July 4th. And here we are at Hood River. Hood River is a really famous location for July 4th celebration. So of course we did the July 4th thing, enjoyed their wonderful fireworks display. People came from far and wide. I think one, like in Oregon, you know, it's not as safe to set off fireworks because like there was a fire ban everywhere. So I think firework displays were few and far between. And the Hood River fireworks display was like really famous. So people came from like within an hour away. It was very popular, well attended. And you can tell, you know, a really great fireworks display. So we woke up the next day on July 5th. We're making our way back to Portland now. On the Columbia River is the famous fish hatchery where they raise salmon, trout, and sturgeon. Really cool. They're white sturgeon. They're not the sturgeon we have in the Delaware River, but really outstanding. Sturgeon, like alligators, are one of the few species that really hasn't changed much over the years. We visited the famous Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area with like the waterfall after waterfall after waterfall. And, you know, even after a killer trip on the river, tons of hiking, tons of fishing, camping for 7 days. We stopped to do a quick hike for the waterfall, and the kids just wanted to go all the way up to the top. I'm so proud of them. And we did, you know, we hauled our butts up there. And it's one of those amazing waterfalls where as soon as you go a half a mile from the parking lot, you find almost nobody. But within a half mile of the parking lot, there was like 400 people. And hey, this is just about to wrap up. If you've never been to Portland, Portland is home to the largest bookstore in the country or the world, Powell's Books. And my son found the Harry Potter section right away and just plugged right in and brought home a Harry Potter trivia book that I finally have learned all of the answers to, so he can no longer stump me. So rounded out the trip with a lot of fun. Everybody had an awesome time. Really glad you could join me for that great journey. This is our group photo. Just once again, wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some photos and memories with you of the John Day River. I hope you learned something new about Oregon, about fossils, geology, packing for a multi-day canoe camping trip or rafting trip. And hope you learned more about the John Day watershed. It was new to me. It is an outstanding national treasure. 220 miles of it designated under the National Wild and Scenic Rivers program. Just view after view like this. Like if you want to visit an untrammeled, untouched landscape, probably either best toured by raft or by horse, the John Day would be the place for you. So that's a wrap. And again, wanted to just thank you all for giving me this opportunity. Let me take a look in the chat and see what we got for questions, and we'll go from there. Well, we got some positive comments. I appreciate hearing from all of you. You know, it's not easy taking a family rafting, but like honestly, it's, in my opinion, it's not like about the family and the kids. Me and my wife, before we had kids, we went on trips like this. We lived our life, you know? So like the idea of having a kid, what are we going to do? We're going to go rafting. You're coming. we're doing it. Come join us. So really glad the kids love it as much as they do, and we have such an adventurous group of friends and family. I don't see any outstanding questions. If you have a question now, you're welcome to come off of mute or comment and share that with the group before we adjourn tonight.
Mark,
Well,
hi.
Mark, I thoroughly enjoyed the thing, and I think I too did learn something.
I really appreciate that, Phil. Were there any last call for questions or comments?
Yeah, Mark, it's Rita.
Rita.
I didn't catch a piece of your presentation, so I'm wondering, was this the kids' first rafting trip?
My kid has been on many rafting trips that were 1 day long, and he's been
Okay.
on many canoe trips. He's been down the Delaware River for weekend trips. He's been to the Adirondacks. The other kids have all been camping, but have never done a 7-day, 6-night whitewater rafting trip. It was definitely the next step for all of them.
Do they want to go back?
They sure do.
That's
You
excellent.
know what? I think they're also hooked with, I'm really glad about the Native American stories were so popular. They just want to learn about that amazing heritage as well. Thanks.
What a great experience.
Great. And there were very few bugs, no chiggers specifically. We had no ticks.
Wow.
We did have what were they? Like large black, they weren't cockroaches. They have those longer arms, a lot of those, but didn't bother us too much. So generally, if you don't like bugs, go to the desert, very few bugs.
No problems with the airlines or flying?
Dan, we padded it a lot on the front end and back end. So we
Okay.
had a couple of days in Portland to prep the trip, and we had a couple of days afterwards. We did have some shuffling with flights, but nothing that was too problematic. I think our friends that flew up from Los Angeles got delayed significantly, and we did all of the food shopping without them, and they missed the first day they were planning to be there. But it's a reminder when you've got like a trip like that, we had to pad we had to have enough flexibility if something went wrong, because we were locked in for 7 days and 6 nights on the river. And if you got to the river a day late, you were out of luck. We had a permit, we had to launch, we had to do it. So really glad it worked out from the logistics standpoint, but a reminder to give yourself a little flexibility, because flights do juggle quite a bit these days, it seems like.
Yeah. Did you drive to the takeout place and then they shuttled you up to the launch, or how did that work out?
Oh, thanks, Dan. I forgot to mention that the outfitter that dropped off the rafts, we paid them to take Joe and Jules' car and drive it to the end.
Okay.
So when they dropped the rafts off, they also had a driver grab the car and then left it at the end for us, which costs a pretty penny, but like we didn't really have a choice.
Yeah. But then you had a way to get back to the other cars that you rented.
Right. So actually what we did is we could have done it all. So we could have gone to the put-in, dropped all the gear, driven cars to the bottom of the river, driven back up, paddled the river, then at the end of the trip, driven up, got in the car to put in and gone back down. But it's about a 4-hour drive one way. So instead of wasting 2 days of our lives driving cars back and forth, the first day when we got to camp and I showed those pictures of the trees with the cages around them, we actually sent all the cars down to the end of the river. We had 3 cars, 2 rental cars and Joe's car, left 2 down there, drove Joe's car back up to the put-in. Then we paid for the outfitter to shuttle Joe's car down to the end while we were on the river.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to turn it back over to Phil, and thank you all for having me this evening. You know where to find me. Happy to answer any questions. And what a pleasure. Looking forward to the program on the Scottish Highlands in February. Phil.
Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate your excellent show, your slides, your fishing stories, and particularly the stories about the Indians and the geology of the area. So again, thank you very much. And I would say to each of you, have a good rest of January and beginning of February. And yes, Leslie, we are looking forward for you to take us to the Scottish Highlands. Is there anything that you wish to say that might whet our appetite?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mark. That was a wonderful presentation. And secondly, I don't think you're going to see as many sunny days as Mark had on the river that we saw in Scotland. So, but we all had a good time. So I hope that, yes, we can get it together and see if I not top it, but you have the bar up high, Mark. So we'll see what I can do. But thank you.
Yes, Mark did put the did put the bar high, but hey, we are talking about real life trips here, and we're looking forward to yours. And again, thank you all, and see ya in a month.
Yes, thank you.
Lenny, anything you or Bill have to say here at the end?
Nope, just thanks to Mark for a wonderful program, and we're looking forward to seeing Leslie in February on the 15th.
Very good. Have a good month until then. See ya.